I was a loving husband, with a wife I would die for, two wonderful friends, a very successful construction business, and an exciting future ahead of me yesterday before I stopped by Dad's store. When my spouse and I would become parents. I am a resentful person now, determined to ruin my friends and wife. Well, I have no intention of doing anything to end up behind bars, but you never know. I could make a mistake and lose it. You might be curious as to why I changed all of a sudden. Actually, I didn't change all that much, rather, I started worrying a few months ago and quickly changed. As I hurtle down the path of retaliation, pay attention to my tale of woe and follow along. Now, let's get the story started. I grew up in the same town where I attended college. With the exception of a small number who had moved away or passed away, all of my friends were close by. The hardware store and building supply center in our community were owned and run by my father. He had hoped that after I earned my degree, I would return to assist him and eventually take over the business. He had made me work in the store when I was younger, and before I graduated from high school, I worked there a lot of evenings and weekends. I liked chatting to the contractors that bought their materials from Dad when I was in college. I observed how they built things and questioned them when I was making deliveries. I didn't love my job at Dad's store, but I also didn't love it. Making deliveries on my own after helping to unload was the most enjoyable aspect of my job. The last thing I wanted was to take over the store. Like many boys in town, I did yard work for pocket money when I wasn't working at the store. I once observed a widow at work as she attempted to fix a storage building in her yard. She was having a lot of problems, which were caused in part by her lack of the right equipment, in part by her weakness from the heavy lifting, and in part by her ignorance of what to do. I finally offered to assist her after finishing the yard. She was apprehensive at first because I was only a 15-year-old boy. I'm still not sure how I mustered the confidence to ask her to hire me, but I did. She couldn't do the work clearly, I told her, and I believed I could. I pointed out to her that she was simply not tall enough or strong enough to perform the job, and I also told her some of the inappropriate things I had witnessed her doing. If she bought the materials, I would do it for $50, I told her. I told her she did not have to pay me if she was unhappy with the work when I was done. At last, she consented to let me handle the task. She paid me when I completed the task to her satisfaction. But more than just giving me the money, she did something for me that I really value. She started bragging to her older, single friends about how well I had done the repair and how well I had mowed her yard. Other women started calling me to ask me to fix things for them. I always took care to complete the work accurately. I would ask one of my contractor friends for help if I was unsure how to accomplish a task. My prices were consistently lower than those of a legitimately licensed contractor. Men and families started calling me after I had worked for a few elderly ladies. I had a small handyman business and many of the licenses I needed to perform the work by the time I was a college student. I continued to operate my lawn care company. Occasionally, especially during the summer, I had to enlist the assistance of my friends in order to keep up. I was earning enough money on the weekends, in the summer, and in the evenings to cover my dates, my college expenses, and my newer truck. Even though I have to admit that I worked long hours and that my dates usually started later than most boy dates, I was still able to enjoy my youth. I rented an apartment after I graduated from high school because I was sick of living with my parents. It was during my first year of college that I lived in the apartment. After my lease expired, I started looking for a house to rent because I didn't like living in an apartment. Jo, one of my closest friends from high school, had recently gone through a divorce. After she discovered him having an affair with one of our classmates, she filed for divorce. Blenda was a real estate agent who had financial difficulties. One evening at our favorite hangout, we were chatting and offering our condolences for her failed marriage. Neither of us enjoyed living in an apartment where we were both residents. I informed her that I was considering renting a home. I asked her if she could show me any rental properties that she thought I could afford. She inquired as to my ability to pay. I told her I had never thought of that, and she looked shocked, saying, "Hell, Stan, with a 30-year loan, you could buy a pretty nice house for that much a month. Why don't you buy a house instead of rent?" That way, you could build equity instead of pouring your money down a deep, empty rat hole as rent. I said that my down payment amount wasn't too high. Well, let me do some checking, and I'll get back to you, she replied. I even got an older friend to buy me a beer when I left the hangout. I had forgotten our conversation by the end of the evening, but she had not. However, I suppose the prospect of a nice commission makes you feel that way. Glenda called me the following Monday night and asked to meet at our town's bar once more. We had a few bars where miners could eat in a small room while we served hamburgers and soda. She seemed excited and had some papers in front of her when I walked in. She started talking almost before I was even seated. Stan, I found several places that I think you can afford, but most of them aren't in very good locations. I did find one place for sale that I think you might like. Do you remember the old Harris place on the edge of town? I nodded yes, and she continued, well, you know, when they got older, they built a nice new 3-car garage and put a mother-in-law apartment over it. I think they were planning to use it for a living caregiver if the need arose. The new garage was several feet from the house. 2 years ago, you remember, the house caught fire. I shook my head yes again, and she said, well, they decided not to rebuild and moved into a retirement community here in town. The garage was not damaged too badly during the fire. I was talking to Ida the other day, and she said they were tired of paying the taxes on the place and doing what little upkeep they did. She said they wanted to sell the place, and I listed it. It is 20 acres, and they are asking $110,000 for it. You would have to do a little work on the garage and apartment, but it would be great for you. The best thing is all the utilities are already in. There are several newer houses going up in the area, so I really expect a contractor to try and buy it soon and subdivide it. It isn't in the multi-list book yet, so it hasn't shown but a time or two. They would only need about $20,000 down, Stan. A 20-year payment would be about half the rent you now pay monthly, so if you could make the down payment, I really think this would be a good deal for you. I considered it for a long time. Even though I didn't have much money, I really wanted it based on my memories of the location. I told her I would like to check it out that evening. I called my dad later that night to ask if he would loan me the down payment. Admittedly, he wasn't overly eager to move in, but I pointed out that the land payments would equal half of my current rent, so I could give him some money back every month once I fixed up the apartment and made it habitable. When I saw the place, we finally came to an agreement that he would loan me the down payment if I wanted to buy it. I visited the location the following evening and fell in love all over again. It was even more beautiful than I remembered, despite the burnt-out shell of a house remaining there. Not every tree and shrub in the yard was destroyed by the fire. I could see a small stream winding through the property as I looked down the hill. I instructed Glenda to draft a $90,000 offer. After classes on Tuesday night, I received a call from Glenda. She seemed thrilled and replied, Stan, I can't believe it. When I presented the offer to Ida and Homer, they were going to reject it out of hand. I was getting ready to leave when she turned to Homer and asked him if he thought you were the nice young man that had cut their yard all those years. They asked me if you had a mowing service in school, and when I told them you did, they smiled and began telling me what a nice young man you were. Anyway, they won't take $90,000 for the place, but they did counter with $97,500. Isn't that great? I didn't give it much thought. I replied, yeah, that's fine. Tell them I will pay that, and I want possession at closing. My father had to co-sign the loan document with the bank, but it was approved, and in late April I was able to take ownership of the property. On June 1st, I moved into the apartment after making the required repairs. I kept myself busy for the next few months by working on small building projects and the yard for my summer business. I had 10 workers by now, the most of them were part-time. I had time to go on a date with Patty and start doing some housework. Once I had cleared out the debris from the burned house, I had a friend who works as an engineer inspect the foundation. Since the subflooring had not burned through, he determined that the foundation was solid. I could use it to rebuild because the attic and second floor had been the main areas affected by the fire. Because I wouldn't have to dig up as much dirt or pour a new cement foundation, this would save me several thousand. The first floor of the house had been a smaller, older building measuring roughly 1,000 square feet. Almost all of the work was done by me. I rented a backhoe and extended a foundation toward the garage. I started building a nice home for myself with my free time and extra money. I built a breezeway, glass, and an enclosed cement floor to connect the house to the garage. I arranged for a big hot tub to be installed on the breezeway cement pad. When I built it, I installed it here with a stove to provide heat and ducted it throughout the rest of the house. I completed the house the summer after I graduated from college. I built it for comfort and convenience, and it was 2,450 feet long. I had a brick exterior, granite countertops, oak trim, and stainless appliances. It was a very upscale house, but it wasn't a McMansion. I had a lovely covered patio with a southerly view of the little stream. It was adored by Patty. I almost felt like Patty married me for my house, not for me, when we were married. By the time I graduated from college, I was proficient in the construction of new buildings. In addition to building additions, I also fixed older houses, buildings, and garages. But now, new structures accounted for a large portion of my income. I now employed 20 people. When Patty and I got engaged, she started working for my father in his company. She worked as an assistant manager full-time after receiving her degree. When he retired, he was preparing her to become manager. Since I was the only child, the company would come to us after he passed away. Dad provided me with all the materials I needed, so we increased the family's earnings from my construction company. I was childhood sweetheart to my wife, Patty, and like most married men, I assumed we would be together forever. Sure, like any married couple, we had our share of arguments, but they were small ones. During our high school and college years together, we experienced the typical breakup experienced by most newlyweds. During that time, we both dated and had intimate relationships with other people, but we always ended up back together because we could not find someone else we loved more. I did think of one girl who could have been the one, but before we decided on that, one of my friends had her engaged. At last, during our final year of university, Patty and I established a firm relationship. I proposed to her that Christmas, and she accepted. After we graduated in September, Patty scheduled the wedding. Even then, the wedding was on the verge of happening due to Patty's insistence on having a prenuptial agreement. I wish we hadn't gotten married now. Anyway, enough of the depressing tale. Patty, or perhaps her father, did not want me to obtain the several $100,000 that she had inherited from her grandfather. I told her that I didn't want to spend her money and that I was angry that she believed I would marry her for it. The night she told me about the prenuptial agreement, we were, at the very least, not getting along. Now, I suppose I was fortunate. My parents chose to stop by and see me that evening while they were out for a drive. Patty was so enraged that she scurried out as soon as I opened the door for them. Dad and Mom watched as she stormed to her car and drove off, but before she passed them on the landing, I heard her say, "You need to talk some sense into your son, or this wedding may never occur." They turned to face me and inquired as to the nature of our disagreement while I was still standing and holding the prenuptial agreement. Dad was sitting there looking frowning and asked to see the agreement. I told them, and Mom said, "Oh Stan, we thought it might be something important." "Honey, we know you aren't marrying her for her money, so what's the big problem? Sign the darn thing and marry the girl if you love her?" He carefully examined it and responded, "This seems pretty straightforward, except she did not have the attorney exempt your place here or your potential inheritance from us from the community property. It seems fair that if she exempts her funds and anything she may inherit from her side of the family, that the same should be exempt for you, son. Why don't we take this to the business attorney and have him make suggestions?" I grabbed the document and carefully read it. Dad was right, it was limited to her inheritances and money. Once again, I became enraged. He said he would schedule an appointment for me after I gave my agreement. Since I had used his lawyer for a few legal matters, I suppose he also served as my attorney. Dad and the lawyer agreed, and I was given a Tuesday appointment. He made the modifications we discussed after scanning the agreement into his computer. After he was done editing the document, it excluded my business, land, and anything I might inherit, just as it excluded Patty's land and business as well. The night my lawyer completed the agreement revisions, I went to her house. When Patty and her father read the updated agreement, I had already signed it. They both started to get upset. He looked at me and said, "Just what is the idea of changing the agreement we prepared, young man? I thought you loved my daughter, and now you are accusing her of wanting to take your house and business. You know when you marry, that will become her home also. If, heaven forbid, you divorce, don't you think she would deserve a place to live?" I became angry with him and replied, "Yes, sir, she would deserve a place to live, but it seemed fair to my father and to me that if the possessions she had before we married and her potential inheritance were to be protected in case of divorce, the same should apply to me. You will note that any accumulation we have from earnings or investments during the marriage would be divided equally, unless the marriage ends due to infidelity. In that case, each of us would leave with what we brought into the marriage or inherited, and the non-injured party would leave with 75% of the marital assets accumulated after the marriage. I feel that there should be some penalty built into the agreement as compensation or punishment for any infidelity." Patty and her father were way beyond upset. They were furious about the proposed agreement. It goes without saying that Patty and I had a very tense few days together. Since she was the one who requested a prenuptial agreement, I repeatedly questioned why she was upset about the terms of the agreement. Patty explained that most of the time it was because she shared my affection for the house and I wanted to throw her out on the street in the event of a divorce. She believed that if we got divorced, it wouldn't be just for me to keep her house. She had thought just as I was about to ask for my ring back. We had to wait a few weeks to return to our previous situation before she requested a prenuptial agreement. But she eventually signed the amended agreement. We at last set aside our resentment and expressed forgiveness to one another for the hurt feelings caused by the prenuptial agreement. We got married on schedule, and for the next 25 years, we never looked back and regretted a thing. I didn't think of anyone else as a potential lover, and neither did we. I know now that Patty did. Yesterday, I managed to catch her. I didn't mind Patty working in the lumber yard, it was just that she had to put up with a lot of flirting. To be honest, I was a little envious because I knew a lot of the men who bought stuff from Dad. They were lustful for each other, and Patty was a lovely, lively woman. Joe, one of my friends, couldn't keep his pecker in his pants, so he was already divorced. I would frequently walk into the store and see him making small talk with Patty. I won't say that we got into heated arguments about him or her flirting with other men, but we did have some lively conversations. Patty insisted that in order to maintain her customers' satisfaction, she had to flirt a little. I informed her that, in my opinion, all she needed to do was be kind, cordial, and their friend, not a flirt. She objected to my description of her behavior as flirting, of course, claiming that's exactly what she was doing. Both Patty and I received strong support for our careers from our college degrees. Mine was in business administration and mine was in construction management. I made the decision that we had enough money to build a house on speculation not long after I graduated from college. Dad made the exception for me when it came to his rule that all accounts needed to be paid by the end of the month. I could take out up to $100,000 on account and pay when a house sold, he said, because I was family. But in case something happened to me, he did maintain a lien against the properties. Every other client was expected to make a monthly payment in full. I knew I was good at what I did. Although I was a general contractor, I didn't work with many subcontractors. I had my own crews for wiring, plumbing, drywall finishing, and framing. Yes, I did hire someone to do the hack. Even so, I landscaped and installed yards on my projects using my still-in-operation yard care crews, assuming, of course, that the clients would hire us to do so. Either way, I employed the speculation house to occupy my crews during downtime. I made an effort to keep my men occupied because I didn't want to fire them if I didn't have to. The spec house sold before we could finish it and install the yard. I started another, but we finished it to the new owner's specifications even though it sold before it was finished. I now had enough cash on hand to work on 2 spec houses simultaneously. The business was growing all of a sudden, and I was nearly out of time to complete the smaller jobs that used to be my main source of income. We were in tall clover, Patty's salary and my profits. We were quickly rising to the top of the income scale in our 25,000-person small town. But all of our accomplishments had a cost. Together with the crews, I would work 8 to 10-hour days and complete paperwork both before and after the construction day. I would meet with clients and potential clients in the evenings to discuss project progress and work on bids. Patty started staying late at work to finish her books. Our time together seemed to be dwindling. I would frequently pass the building center and see her car along with 2 or 3 others. Occasionally, when I entered, Joe or another student would be seated and conversing with her. Presumably, they were obtaining prices from her because they were all employed in the building trade. However, something didn't feel quite right. Whenever I entered the office, Patty would frequently be flushed and they would frequently be sipping beer. Of course, I would visit them and have one with them, but something didn't feel right. In the end, I made the decision to turn off the building alarm's local buzzer. Generally, a buzzer would sound whenever someone entered the building through any of the doors. The one at the warehouse entrance has been disabled by me. I was a loving husband with a wife I would die for and 2 friends I really enjoyed yesterday before I stopped by Dad's store. I had a bright future ahead of me and a very successful construction business. I was eager for the day when my spouse and I would become parents. I'm a resentful hole now, determined to ruin my friends and wife. Yes, I don't intend to do anything that would land me in jail, but who knows? I could make a mistake and lose my mind. You might be curious as to why I changed all of a sudden. Actually, I didn't change all that much, rather, I started worrying a few months ago and quickly changed. As I hurtle down the path of retaliation, pay attention to my tale of woe and follow along. Joe's and George's trucks were in the lot when I passed the store last night. I turned onto the lot and proceeded to the door using the buzzer that was disabled. Even before I arrived at Patty's office, I knew what I would discover. Halfway across the building, I could hear her screams and moaning. I pulled out my phone and put it in photo mode. The door to the damn witch's office was ajar. Joe's pants were down, and she was over her desk. He was having sex with her while he stood behind her. At last, he distanced himself from Patty. She was still lying over her desk. George moved to Patty's side and assisted her in standing. I watched and took a picture while George helped Patty undress. He pulled her to him, gave her a deep French kiss, and said, "Here, honey, let me get you naked. I want to play with you." I had planned to get a photo of him with her, then sneak in and take some serious shots to my 2 former friends. To keep them from seeing me until I was ready, I moved away from the door. I went to check if Dad's tape recorder was in his office because I remembered he usually had one there. If I could record some of the talk, that would be great. I returned with the tape recorder after finding it. I watched my wife tend to my 2 former friends while I sat it on the floor next to the door. They went on for a couple of more minutes. What I recorded was an even bigger source of rage. When she got up, I heard Joe say, "Damn, Patty, aren't you glad you let me drill you again at the Christmas party 2 years ago? I told you it would be the best damn sex you ever had in your life, didn't I? I was talking to Jared the other day and told him about the hot honey I was doing now, and he wants to meet you. Are you sure you won't let him come in some evening also?" Patty shoved him away and glanced at him. "No, I don't mind doing you too. Hell, I love doing you too, but I don't want or need anyone else. I didn't like him when we were in school, and I still don't. The one time he screwed me before Stan and I got married, he was an **** hole. He hurt me and didn't even make sure I enjoyed myself. I always enjoyed our time together before we got married, and I still enjoy it. If you can keep your damn mouth shut, we can keep this up forever. But you have to be careful, Stan is getting really pissed at the way you 2 are acting when he can see us. If you don't cool it, I have to cut you off." I made the decision that I had enough photos and tapes. In Dad's office, I had picked up a ball bat. I was going to hurt Joe and George while I was there. A thought occurred to me, and I picked it up and walked into the room. George had been a jealous person all his life. He continued to be married to his high school sweetheart. I had dated her multiple times. In fact, it wasn't until Patty and I got engaged that things got serious. I figured I might just try to woo her before I pulled a fast one on him, since I'd enjoyed our sex. That would actually be a more fitting form of retaliation than simply beating him up. He detested it the few times I had dated her, and he used to cry every time we were on the outs in high school. Reluctantly, I retreated from the room and exited the structure. I did, in fact, reset the alarm and reattach the door's buzzer wires. I was looking forward to the thrill of seeing Patty and her two friends walk across the showroom floor and trigger the burglar alarm as I was leaving. Motion sensors were installed in the building's main section, and alarm keypads were located next to the doors. Therefore, the alarms would go off before they realized they were set. I was aware that she could turn off the alarm, but the harm would already have been done. She would be left wondering how it was set up, and she would have to wait for the police to arrive inside the building. I pondered whether Joe and George would be able to leave before the police arrived and how she would respond to the alarm. Patty arrived home quite late. She approached me nervously as soon as she entered the house. She looked scared, based on the look on her face. Patty licked her lips and sat on the edge of her chair facing me. I asked her, grinning to myself, "What's the matter, honey? You seem nervous and you're a lot later than you usually are." She explained, "I was working late, we couldn't get the books to balance, and I didn't think I would ever find the problem." "What were you doing tonight?" "I thought you might come by or at least call since I was so late, and now I'm getting used to you being late. And I didn't feel like coming by and drinking beer with you and your boyfriends," Patty said with a blush on her face. "Damn you, Stan. I keep telling you nothing's going on. Joe and George weren't even there. Why can't you get it through your damn head that I have to visit with them to keep them happy?" I said, "Okay, honey. I know you have to schmoo the customers. I just drove by about 6:30 and thought I saw their trucks there." Well, they were there then. They came in just about closing time, and I had to wait for them to pay for and load their order before I got to the books. They were gone shortly after closing. I just meant they weren't there the whole time I was. "I'm tired, I'm going to take a nice hot bath and go to bed." I grinned and replied, "Great, I'll be there in a jiffy. I've been horny all day." Patty looked concerned once more and replied, "No, I'm sorry, honey, I'm really bushed. I don't feel like it tonight. Why don't we have a quickie in the morning before we go to work?" I grinned. Before I went for sloppy seconds, I felt like it would be a cold day in hell. I pondered the number of times I had unknowingly received them. I mentally noted that I should also get tested for any diseases. That was the last thing I said to jerk Patty's chain. I left early the next morning, so I could leave before Patty woke up. I made an appointment as soon as the office of my attorney opened. If I would take him out for lunch, he was able to accommodate me at noon. I accepted, and we stopped by a sandwich shop close to his office for a quick bite to eat. I asked if we could quickly grab something to eat and head back to his office, but he insisted on discussing the issue there. I just told him it was sensitive to my business and I didn't want things to leak until I had all the I's and T's crossed. He said, "Of course, but what could be so secret? We can't talk here. I do a lot of business over lunch." As soon as we arrived at his office, I started outlining the issue. I informed him that I wanted a prenuptial agreement to be strictly enforced and that I wanted a divorce from Patty right away due to her adultery. I played the tape for him and showed him the pictures. I also told him not to use the tape unless absolutely necessary, and to just show the photos of Joe and Patty. "Why do you want to keep George out of it?" he inquired. I told the lawyer about my chat with his wife and said, "Well, I'm not sure you will approve, but after the divorce, I have some plans for George. I don't want to tip him off. I hope you aren't planning anything violent. I have to report something like that as an officer of the court." I laughed and said, "No, I'm not planning violence. I used to date George's wife, Sue. She and he dated and broke up several times. Twice I dated her during the breakup. They almost always go to Murphy's Tavern on weekends. I think I'm going to make some moves on Susan to piss George off. I want to give her the info I have on him cheating, but I want to play with his mind first. She will get a heads up on this, and I will get a little payback on good old George. He used to get so angry every time she dated someone else, and I hear he gets jealous when she spends too much time dancing with other people. I just want to see if I can seduce her after my divorce is final and let him find out about it. I guess you could say I want to give him a dose of his own medicine. I also intend to try and seduce Joe's fiancée. There will be no violence unless one of those a-holes starts it. Stan, I don't like this, it could blow up in your face. But you are right, there is nothing illegal about seducing a woman, but you should know they could sue you for alienation of affection. Lawrence leaned back in his chair and thought for a moment. I laughed and said, let them. Bring it on. I will counter-sue, and I have pictures and a tape to use in that suit. Don't you think it would be almost a wash? At last, he replied, yes, the suits could possibly balance out if one is filed. But you need to remember, you might have larger assets than they do. Even if you both won the lawsuits in court, you might come out worse off financially if there is a judgment against you. Besides, don't you think that is a disgusting thing to do to those ladies? I suppose they will be hurting enough just finding out about their men cheating on them. If you use them like that, it will surely hurt them worse. Admittedly, my heart was as hard as stone. I replied, I don't care. They took the chance when they chose those cheating a-holes. I got a call on Wednesday from Lawrence. He informed me that Patty would be served that afternoon and that the divorce was ready to be filed. Fantastic, I exclaimed. I'll get busy and change the locks on the doors this morning. I will pack as many of her clothes as I can and put them on the front porch. I am going to place pictures of her and Joe on every door so she can see them when she comes over. Who knew who was the most enraged when they hit the fan at Dad's store? Oh boy. After Patty was served, I received a call from 3 very irate people. She called, cried uncontrollably, and said she would regret having me as a child. Not long after she left the store, Dad called. I had just hung up from talking to Dad when her father called and blessed me out. While we were talking, I said, Dad, I really need to thank you for talking me into that prenuptial agreement. I filed for the divorce because I walked into the office Saturday night and found Patty having sex on her desk with Joe and George. I have pictures and a tape thanks to you. I will get to keep my home and business as well as 3/4 of our assets. I do think you should change your store locks and the computer passwords in case she decides to do something we wouldn't appreciate. I suggest you fire her, but that is your decision. You need to decide if you can trust her after this. Damn son, I just can't believe that right here in the store. Yeah, I'll have the girls get right on the changes to the computer and so forth. We'll be over this evening to talk some more. Dad and Mom were devastated when they arrived at my house that evening. Patty was the daughter they never had, and Mother had loved her especially. I persuaded them that letting Patty go would be best. I expressed my belief that Patty could potentially cause harm to the company if she continued in her role. When Patty learned the following morning that she had lost her job in addition to her spouse, she lost her temper. The following Monday, Dad was served with a lawsuit alleging wrongful dismissal, and I received a countersuit for the divorce. It appeared that Lawrence would receive a sizable payout for this mess. We made the decision to have the company audited by a third-party accountant. In addition, Glenda entered the bar Tuesday night while I was seated there. She just settled into the booth across from me, just like most of our friends in our town, without asking to join me. What's this I hear about you and Patty? She asked. I said, depends on what you heard, but I suppose most of the rumors are true. I caught her and Joe screwing in her office after work the other day. I got pictures and filed for divorce. The way it is going around town is you got jealous about her having male friends and talking with them in the store, so you filed for divorce. She is also saying you were vindictive and got your father to fire her so she couldn't even live. I laughed and said, well, Dad did let her go, but it was because she did what she did in the office and because he had our CPA come in and check the books. I can't say what they found, but she had made some other mistakes also. Now, can we just let it go? Yeah, I'm sorry, though. I know how you feel. That damn Joe did the same thing to me, you know. A-hole never could keep his pecker in his pants except when he was at home. I saw a small tear run down Glenda's cheek. I reached over and wiped it from her face, then said, "Yeah, I think he screwed almost all the girls he ever dated and a lot of other men's wives. That was partly why I didn't want Patty to flirt with him or be alone with him. I really didn't think he would turn on a friend like that, though." Glenda and I downed a couple of beers while we visited, then I walked her out to her car. Just before she got into the vehicle, she gave me a gentle kiss on the cheek. "It'll get better, Stan. I promise." Days seemed to drag on, work came and went. Some of my friends gathered around me to support me in my sorrow, some gathered around to support Patty and were no longer friends. Dad's trial for wrongful dismissal was to begin on a Monday. I was at home the Sunday before when I heard a voice calling to me from the side of the house. I have to admit I did not rise to greet my visitor, in fact, I fell on my bum trying to do so. I had been communing with John Barleycorn all afternoon and I'm afraid he tripped me up. Well, to be precise, when I tried to get up from my Adirondack patio chair, I got my foot caught and fell on my bum. There I was, lying on the ground in a puddle of spilled Glenmorangie, looking up the dress of one of my best supporters. Linda was standing, looking down at me, laughing. She squatted to help me up. "Can you even stand by yourself?" I have to admit I giggled more than I laughed when I said, "Well, I thought I could, but here I am, lying at your feet when I tried to do it." Before she could help me up, Glenda broke out in a loud laugh at my comment. She did help me to stand, and I was able to do so more or less by myself. After we quit laughing, I invited her to sit in one of the chairs across from me, and I more or less fell back into mine. Linda was becoming almost a fixture around my house. Other than my mother, she was almost my only feminine companion, and I treasured her company. Unfortunately, today I really didn't want to see anyone, and I'm afraid it showed in our talk. Finally, Glenda looked at me and asked, "Stan, did I do something to make you angry?" I felt my chest heave and my eyes began running. I hurt and could not talk. I scrunched up my face and just shook my head at Glenda. "No," I whispered. "You are almost the only one who even comes around any longer. Today I have been feeling sorry for myself. I have also been thinking about the court case tomorrow. A few months ago, I thought I had it all, a loving wife, a great business, you know, the American dream. Now all I have is a broken heart, a busted marriage, and I am facing court battles to keep my and my family's material possessions. I am so angry with life and with what Patty did to me. I have turned most of my friends against me. All I know is I want to hurt Patty, Joe, and George so badly they will be sorry they ever heard of me. That is almost all I think of any longer. I have plans, and they are not very nice. I know when I follow through on them, you will leave me too, and damn it, I don't want that, but I can't help it. I want to hurt those a-holes, and I know when I do, it will hurt me too." Linda rose from her chair and sat in my lap. She wrapped her arms around me and just held me. "Why, Stan? Why do you think I will leave you if you take revenge on those a-holes? Haven't we been friends all our lives? What are you planning to do that is so bad? I don't understand why you are angry with George, though." "Oh, Stan, please promise me you won't hurt them." "No, Glenda." "Well, I guess that depends on how you define that. I don't intend to physically damage them unless they come after me first. I intend to do my best to drive Joe into bankruptcy and out of town. I intend to use all the money I can spare to take care of him and George. For that matter, unfortunately for our friendship, I think what I intend to do besides that will run you off. You see, Glenda, I intend to steal their women just like they stole mine." Glenda pushed herself back from me and looked me in the eyes. "What, Stan? You're not going to? What do you mean? And you still haven't told me why you want to hurt George. Also, simple. I haven't told anyone, but George was one of Patty's lovers, so I owe him some pain. I'm going to move in on their women and bed them. I'm going to make them love me and take them from their men like they took Patty from me. And I am going to make sure Joe and George find out about it. Stan, you can't do that. What about the poor girls? That will hurt them too. Stan, please don't do that. It would devastate those poor girls more than just knowing what a cheating a-hole their man was. They would fall in love with you, and then when they found out you were just playing them, it would gut them. I can't believe you would even think about doing something like that. They're hurt enough just being with those cheating a-holes. Glenda pushed herself back from me and struggled to stand. When she got to her feet, she looked down at me. Stan, you're right. If you do something that despicable, Oh, I don't know what I'll do. But Linda turned and stomped out of my yard. I heard her car drive off shortly thereafter. My divorce was proceeding rapidly since we had such a good prenuptial agreement, it was mostly a slam dunk. I only had to wait for the normally slow movement of the courts. The trial for wrongful dismissal, however, was another matter. We were all nervous when the trial started. Patty's attorney made my father and me look like ogres. He twisted our every sentence and tried to put words in our mouths. Finally, things began to look up when our attorney began his questioning. He brought out how much time Patty spent visiting and flirting with customers. He called witnesses both from within and without the company to verify the behavior. He brought out the fact she routinely drank beer at the store, and while it was not illegal if done away from the business area, he made it look like she was ignoring her duties to do so. Lawrence called Dad's accountant, and this witness did enormous damage to Patty. The accountant said that Patty had authorized Joe and George to exceed their preset spending limits, and she had authorized them extra time to pay. In fact, their accounts were 3 months past due, and they were only making token payments. Patty's attorney then asked about my large credit account and the fact I did not pay it off every month like the business required for other customers. My father said that was true, but that he had made a special deal with me and took an ownership interest in my structures to protect the business in case I defaulted. He got the cost of the materials I purchased for the buildings plus a 3% ownership for advancing me the materials. He pointed out that Patty had not only exceeded her authority in allowing Joe and George the higher credit, but that she had not even tried to protect the business in case they defaulted. Finally, the hearing ended after 2 days of testimony. When the decision was handed down, Patty and her father were almost charged with contempt of court. They were very loudly complaining because the decision went against her. In fact, the judge said, "Miss Train, you should thank your lucky stars your father-in-law chose not to refer this to the authorities. I think he could make a case for criminal negligence, perhaps even theft against you and your 2 accomplices. I would suggest you remove yourself from this courtroom, and I would further suggest you think about the kindness shown you by these people. If they had countersued, I strongly believe they could have won a substantial settlement from you." Patty and her father were sputtering, and her face was white as they were escorted from the courtroom. As I was leaving the courtroom, Lawrence stopped me and said, "Stan, I have good news for you also. Just before the hearing began this morning, I was informed the judge signed off on your divorce. In 30 days, your marriage will be over. Do you want me to mail the papers, or will you pick them up?" That evening, my parents and I were sitting on their patio, relaxing after the trial. We were both glad and sad. We were glad we all came through unscathed except for the legal bills, and sad that my marriage and their relationship with Patty ended the way they did. We had done a barbecue and were now sitting with our iced refreshments while we just chilled out. In truth, we were all feeling the effects of the liquor. I was just at the point of telling my parents how bitter I was. I said, "I still can't believe my friends would do something like that to me, much less that Patty would. If it takes me the rest of my life, I am going to make them pay for this." My mother looked at me in shock and said, "Oh, Stan, please don't do that. A man that lives with bitterness is a poor excuse for a man. Take the high road and live your life to the fullest. In the long run, that will make your life more fulfilling and could even make those 3 sorry for what they did." We heard the tap, tap, tap of small footsteps on the sidewalk just before we heard a female voice say, "Thank you, Mrs. Tyne, that is just what I have been trying to get him to do." If anyone can feel the pain he does, it is I, and I think I have risen above it. At first, I was just like Stan. I wanted nothing more than to eviscerate Joe, but bit by bit, as time went past, I began to let my anger and my desire for revenge slip away. One day, I realized I not only didn't care any longer, but I realized in almost every way, I was better off without the cheating a-hole. Glenda came fully onto the patio and looked directly at me. She continued, "Stan, I know how empty you feel now. I know the feelings that are still burning through your consciousness. But believe me, dwelling on them just makes them worse. Please let the anger go and get on with your life. Just next time, be more careful. Be more sure of the friends you choose and the woman you take into your heart. If you were to be honest and admitting, hindsight is 20/20ths, I bet you can see the seeds of this heartbreak existed before you married Patty. I know I couldn't still can see that in Joe. He always had an eye for the ladies and always chatted them up. He was always more attentive to them when we were out than he was to me. But I thought I was in love with him. I know you have said Patty was a lot like that. She always flirted with other men and reveled in their attention. Look into your heart and use this knowledge to better yourself. Don't lower yourself to their level and hurt someone. In the long term, it won't make you feel any better." I looked up at Glenda. She was standing, looking at me, and I would swear there were tears in her eyes. The sun was behind her, and her thin sundress didn't hide much. I could see the outline of her very womanly, very desirable body and felt myself respond. With superhuman effort, I wrenched my gaze from her. I felt a flash of disgust with myself. Here I was, not completely divorced, and I was drooling over a friend. Glenda went on with her conversation. She said, "I'm sorry for just dropping by, but I was on my way down to the tavern and wanted to congratulate you on your success today. I have to admit the phone wires have been buzzing this afternoon as people pass on your success in the lawsuit." Glenda looked at all of us and smiled gently, then continued, "I'll go now, but, well, be careful and don't. Oh, hell, I've heard already that Patty has some friends that are talking trash about you, and they have made some threats. I just wanted you to be careful and watch out if you have too much more to drink. Oh, hell, I'm sorry. I'll just go. Good night." Linda turned and rushed from the patio toward her car. We all just sat there and looked at each other. To say we were shocked was an understatement. Mother summed it up best when she said, "Oh, I just can't believe that. How could anyone? Why would anyone be that upset at us?" We continued talking for a short time about nothing of any consequence. I decided I was sober enough to return to my own home. I was getting ready to leave when the phone rang. Mother went in to answer it. I could hear her say, "Oh, no." "When?" "Okay, he'll be there as soon as he can get there." She came out of the house crying and ran up to Dad. She said, "Cedric, that was the police. The silent alarms have gone off in the store, and they want you to come down and turn them off and see if anything is missing. They say the first car on the scene has said most of the windows have been broken out." "Oh, Cedric, how could someone do something like this to us?" Dad and I went to the store. When we got there, we found 2 patrol cars waiting for us. We went inside and turned off the alarm. We walked around and did not find anything obviously missing, but told the officers we would have to take an inventory to be sure. There was some damage to some of the items inside from where the rocks had hit. We called Mom and had her bring down some sleeping bags so we could spend the night. The next morning early, we called the insurance company and then made arrangements to have the glass replaced. I went home later that evening and found some of my windows also broken out. I called the police and reported the vandalism. Of course, they asked their questions, and when asked if I knew of anyone who might do something like this, I said, a few months ago, I would have said no, but now, especially after what I was told yesterday afternoon late and what happened last night, I have to say I might. I just received a divorce because I caught my wife cheating with 2 of my friends. She used to be the assistant manager at my parents' store. When I filed for divorce, Dad let her go. He had the books checked and found many improprieties. She filed a wrongful dismissal lawsuit against him, and he received a judgment in his favor yesterday. A friend told my parents and me that my ex-wife and 2 ex-friends had been making threatening comments. Now I wonder if either of them, or her family, could be involved in this. I know her father was extremely angry over the whole thing and cursed me several times. Of course, we had said something similar when the police took the report at the store. Now I was somewhat more sure we were on the right track. After the vandalism, things got back to normal, or at least as normal as they could be considering the hole that had been torn in our lives when Patty was forced out of them. My parents tried to get back to the way things were, and I struggled. Some days I would do okay, but usually when I got home, I would remember Patty, and the evenings would be crap. If I was working, I could function fine, but the alone times were bad because it had been several years since I had been truly alone all night. I began going out most evenings for supper. I usually had supper in one of the sports bars or local hangouts, so I began drinking more than I had before. Of course, this just tended to make me lonelier and angrier with Patty and her lovers. I would see some of my crew or some of the friends I still had from time to time. They would try to cheer me up and slow down my drinking, but I didn't let them. Occasionally, I would see Glenda, and she would try to get me to let it go. One Thursday evening, I was out and saw a group of women sitting around a table, drinking and having a good time. One of the women caught my eye. It was Susan, George's wife. Now, as far as I knew, no one knew George had been one of Patty's lovers. I remembered my promise to make him pay and walked up to the table they were at. I bent down and said, "Hi, Susan, it's been ages since I saw you. Would you dance with me?" Susan looked up at me with a frown on her face, then she smiled. "Sure, Stan," she said. I smiled and took her hand to help her from the chair. I wrapped my arm around her waist as we walked to the dance floor. We had only danced a few seconds when the song ended. She started to head for the table, but I held her. "Oh, come on, Sue, you promised me a dance, and we hadn't even gotten going yet when the song ended. Surely you can give me a whole song to dance to." Susan relaxed and smiled. She flowed back into my arms when the next song started, and we began swaying to the music. She sighed and said, "You always were a good dancer. I wish George would take me dancing more. I always loved to dance when we were dating." She laid her cheek on my chest, and we swayed to the music until the song ended. She started for the table before the next song started, but I held her hand. When she turned to look at me, I gave her a puppy dog look and said, "One more, please, for old time's sake." Susan looked toward her friends, then smiled a nervous smile and moved back into my arms. As we danced, I said, "I don't mean to make you nervous. Since Patty left, I've been so lonesome, and it feels good to at least be able to dance with someone again. Sometimes I don't know how I'm going to make it." Sue turned her head up to me and said, "Well, Stan, you brought it on yourself. If you weren't so jealous, you wouldn't have lost." I jerked my head back and glared at her. Before she could react, I hissed, "Jealous? I guess in a sense I was, but I'll be damned if I let my wife screw my friends and not do something about it." "You're right," I kicked her out, "and I'd do it again, but I still miss her." It was Susan's turn to break in. She said, "What do you mean? I heard you were upset with Patty flirting and finally just kicked her out of the house, then filed for divorce." I stopped dancing and just held Susan as I explained what I had seen the night I caught Patty. I did leave George out of it this time because I still wanted to make him feel the pain of seeing his wife with someone else. When I finished talking, Susan looked at me and said, "Stan, I just can't believe that. I know Joe is a horn dog, but even he would not do that to a friend. I've known Patty all my life, and she's just not that way. Are you sure you actually saw that?" Now I was pissed. I said, "Yeah, I know what I saw. If you don't believe me, come out to my house, and I'll show you the pictures." I turned and started to walk away when Susan grabbed my arm. "Stan, I'm sorry, but, well, George said that you were just on a real tear." All at once, I remembered I still had the pictures on my phone. I really wasn't thinking when I pulled it out and said, "Here, look at these pictures and tell me Patty or my friends wouldn't do something like that." I handed the phone to Susan and stood as she scrolled through the pictures. I heard her gasp when she saw the first one of Joe and Patty. I had forgotten about George. I remembered his picture was on the phone when I heard Susan cry out and I saw her stop scrolling through the pictures. She was staring at a picture and then tears began rolling down her cheeks. I saw her move to the next picture and she began bawling. She dropped the phone and ran toward her friends. One of them said, "What did you do to her? I thought you were a friend. Why is she crying?" I pushed through the two of them and knelt by Susan's side. I took her hand and said, "Susan, I'm sorry. When you didn't believe me, I got angry and decided to prove I wasn't lying. I forgot I had the pictures of George on the phone." One of her friends grabbed my phone from the floor, and as she started looking at the pictures, said, "What pictures? Oh my God, that son of a witch." All the girls, except for the one trying to calm Susan down, gathered around my phone to look at the pictures. They were all muttering, and I could tell they weren't sure whether to be more angry with me or George. Finally, Susan looked up at me and said, "Just get out of here, Stan. Please, just leave me alone." I stood and took my phone from the girls. I slowly walked away and drove back to my home. I felt like crap. I really did like Susan, and now I was a party to her unhappiness. I wondered how I could have ever thought what I had planned to do to her was okay. I was sick at the hurt I had caused her just by letting her see the pictures. How much worse would it have been if I had taken her to bed and then sent the pictures to George? Before I let her see them, I was sitting on my patio, communing with John Barleycorn, when I heard a car drive into my driveway. I didn't move, even when I heard the car door slam and the pounding on my front door. I took another drink and sat staring across my little slice of heaven. I could make out the shadows of the trees in the moonlight. Finally, I heard the tap, tap, tap of small feet coming around the house and a voice yelling, "Stan, where the hell are you? I know you're home. I can see your truck in the garage. Stan, I'm not leaving until you talk to me. Now open up." As she was saying that, the woman walked up to my back door and began banging on it. Finally, I had enough and said, "Okay, just stop banging on my house. I'm over here. What the hell do you want?" I turned and saw Glenda as she stomped up beside my chair. "Damn you, Stan. I just came from the bar and grill. Did you really have to hurt Susan like that? You just couldn't leave it alone, could you? I ought to beat the tar out of you." I sat and stared up at Glinda, then grabbed her arm as she slammed it down, trying to strike me. As I was wrestling with her, trying to keep her from hitting me, she lost her balance and fell into my lap. I quickly wrapped my arms around her and held on as I said, "Glenda, stop it. If you don't stop, I'm afraid one of us will get hurt. Look, I'm sorry I upset Susan tonight. It wasn't intentional. I had been thinking about what you said, and all I was doing was dancing with her." She began getting on my case because of the way I treated poor Patty, and I lost it. She told me I got what I deserved for being so jealous. Without thinking, I told her I had pictures of Joe and Patty on my phone. I forgot there were also pictures of George there, and when I handed it to her for her to look at, she saw them. Of course, that hurt her, and she began crying. She and her friends told me to get the hell out, and I did. Everyone I had talked to about my planned revenge had advised me against getting it by taking the women. I had already decided not to do that. I know I hurt her, but I just didn't think, and I didn't do it on purpose. At the same time, though, don't you think she deserved to know what an a-hole, what a cheating a-hole, George is? Of course, if she had any sense, she would have realized that by now. She caught him cheating on her enough while we were in school. She should have known he was a cheater. Once a cheater, always a cheater, you know. Glinda was still struggling, but she had calmed down considerably. Finally, I felt her relax even more, and she demanded I let her go. I carefully relaxed my arms, and she moved from my lap and over to one of my chairs, where she once again sat down. I could tell she was looking at me. I heard a sigh, and then she said, "Stan, I don't know what to believe." When I got to the bar, Susan and her friends were already gone, but everyone I talked to told me what a butthead you had been to her. They said you were dancing, and then she broke away from you and ran back to her chair, crying. I just thought, are you sure you didn't do anything to her? I reached into my pocket and threw her my phone. Here, I said, call her yourself and ask her what I did. All I did was forget the damn pictures on my phone, and she saw them. I didn't. Linda and I heard a roar, then screeching tires. Almost immediately after that, we heard the crash of metal on metal. We next heard a car door open, then slam closed. We heard running footsteps and a male voice yelling, "Stan, you son of a witch, get out here. I'm going to kill you, you son of a witch." We heard a splintering crash, then footsteps slamming through my house. Lights began to come on as the intruder went from room to room. I could see George taking swipes at some of my belongings as he went through my house, room to room. Finally, he came back to the kitchen and saw Glenda and me on the patio. He didn't even open the sliding screen door, he just ran through it and toward me. I had stepped away from the chair I was sitting in to meet him. I jumped back just in time as I saw the tire iron he swung at me. "You a-hole," he screamed. "You didn't have to show Susan those damn pictures. It's not my fault you couldn't rein in your wife. But no, you've always tried to get Susan away from me. Even in high school, you did all you could to steal her. Now you've ruined my marriage, and this time you're going to pay, you a-hole. She kicked me out of the house tonight and said you had showed her those damn pictures. Didn't you learn anything from having your house and store trashed? I guess we'll just have to trash you this time." George swung the tire iron once more, and this time it hit me on the shoulder. Damn, that hurt. Thankfully, it was a glancing blow. I could faintly hear Glenda talking on the phone as I dodged George's blow. I managed to get my chair between us, and after he swung once more, I picked it up to use as a shield, perhaps as a weapon. George kept swinging the tire iron and hitting the chair. He was so angry he was crying as he screamed at me. Linda was trying to calm him down, and he turned toward her. "Shut up, you witch," he screamed at her. "I might have known you would be around somewhere. Birds of a feather do flock together, don't they? What are you here to celebrate, screwing over Joe again?" George took a swipe at Glenda, and the end of the iron caught in her blouse, tearing it open. He stumbled and almost fell. As he was stumbling, we heard the sirens from the arriving police cars who came to a stop. We heard the cars screech to a stop in front of my home. I saw the flashing of the red lights on the surrounding trees and watched as officers came around my house, following the sound of the altercation. As the officers came onto the patio, George caught his balance and turned to me once more. As he turned, he screamed, "You a-hole. I'm going to kill you. You've screwed with me for the last damn time." He began moving toward me once more. The lead police officer took in the situation and said, "Sir, put the tire iron down and stay where you are." George looked over his shoulder at the police and continued toward me.